Hey everyone, welcome to episode 12 of Food Culture Curious. On this week's episode, we sit down with Fathima Abdoola, an accredited practicing dietitian from Australia. She talks to us all about her food culture and the influences from her heritage, her religion, and from living in Southern Africa as well as Australia. She shares with us how she makes nutrition care culturally competent for the Southern African population, as well as her private practice work in weight loss. This is such a great episode. I can't wait to share it with y'all. Hey everyone, welcome to Food Culture Curious. My name is Areli. I'm a registered dietitian on a mission to help healthcare professionals become more culturally competent with their nutrition recommendations. Today with me, we have Fathima Abdoola. She's a cultural dietitian and nutritionist who is passionate about helping women lose weight for good and enhance their mindset around healthy eating. She has over 11 years of experience in the industry, working both locally and internationally, with 8 years based in Zambia. Currently, she focuses on her online presence, providing private services to women worldwide. Welcome, Fatima.
Thank you for having me.
I've been so excited to talk to you. I love everything that you're doing on Instagram. I love meeting other dietitians that are culturally humble and culturally inclusive. So I can't wait for this episode.
Me too.
All right. So tell me a little bit about your background. I know you mentioned it's kind of a blend, and I want to hear all about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm the generation Zimbabwean. So, my family migrated from India, Pakistan to Southern Africa, um, and we grew up in Zimbabwe. When I was 11, I moved to Australia. So that was migration number one, technically for me. And I grew up in Australia in terms of secondary and tertiary schooling. And then when I got married, I actually married a Zambian and I moved to Zambia, which is where I've spent most of my career as a dietitian. And I've just recently moved back to Australia 18 months ago with my now family and reestablishing myself here as well. So I've spent the bulk of my life, I think, in Africa, but also spent the bulk of my career working in Zambia. So we're definitely a blend because we've taken on culture from our original ancestry as Indians, but we've also taken on culture from living in Africa for so long. And of course, there's the very big multicultural influence of living in Australia too. So I think, yeah, I'm definitely a blend, but I think it's been awesome that I've lived in lots of different places because it really broadens your mind.
Oh, absolutely. That's so awesome. So tell me a little bit about the type of foods that you had growing up, whatever influences they came from, just in general, what were your basic starches, produce?
For sure. So I think in terms of like the foods that we had, as I mentioned earlier, it's a blend of influences from many different parts of the world, but we still have a lot of staple Indian food because growing up, of course, my grandparents originally from India, so they had their Indian culture foods passed on to my parents, passed on to us, and it's getting diluted through the generations. So rice or roti is going to be like a staple carb. But then the influence of living in Africa means we also have elements like what we call nshima or pap, which is maize meal. So that's something that we will enjoy with certain meals, like for example, when we have a braai, aka a barbecue. So there are those starches that come through as well. And I think, we're also big bread lovers and we love pasta. So there's those influences there as well. And I think those are like, so we have a wide variety of carbohydrates. It's never just one, but I do think it's definitely dominated by rice more than anything. Then when it comes to proteins, there's quite a wide variety of proteins also that we enjoy. I'll definitely say we've never been big on fish, mainly because the countries we were in were landlocked majority of the time. So it's only when I moved to Australia did I really get accustomed to eating different seafoods. So that's been something new in my diet in the last decade. But definitely we do a lot of chicken. Chicken is probably the foundation. We have a lot of like lentils or dals in our diet as well. And then red meat will vary. We usually do either beef or we do more goat as opposed to lamb, and lamb is very Australian. So we have more goat meat, which is eaten quite often in Africa. I think it's more available. So in terms of red meats, those are the main ones that we sort of enjoy at home as well. Um, and then in terms of vegetables and fruits, it's very much seasonal. Like there's some blend of like Indian vegetables that will creep in, especially with the spices of those sorts of things. But there's also the aspect of some of those more African kind of vegetables that we've learned to enjoy eating as well, like rape or even like what they call moringa. So they're just cooked differently. So like different spices, different flavors, but the actual ingredients are very similar a lot of the time with those kind of foods. So yeah, sometimes we'll do like roti and Indian vegetables as a common dish as well. So yeah, I think that gives a little bit of a snapshot, but definitely in my home, I have two big foodies. Both my husband and my son absolutely love trying new things. So we are forever cooking from a different cuisine. I think Japanese is a really big one in our household as well. I think we have sushi once a week at least to satisfy my son. So there is a big multicultural component in our diets overall at home.
That's beautiful for your family to have that background and that exposure to the different cuisines. Um, I'm grateful that I live in Houston. We actually have such a big melting pot of different cultures. So there's lots of great restaurants from anything you can think of, and I'm grateful for that. All right, so tell me a little bit more about any special cultural dishes from the time that you've been in Africa or from your Indian heritage, anything that comes to mind.
Yeah, so I think famous dishes when it comes to Indian heritage has to be very classic, like biryani, or what's even more common actually in like the part of India that we're from is something called akni, which is quite similar. It's a one pot dish. You kind of like, it's kind of like if you were going to take a curry and rice and cook it in one pot, that's kind of what you get. And it's very like special occasions will have it when the community gets together. It's a really common dish as well. So aside from curry and rices, I think akni is like one of those really yummy dishes that you just like associate with like special events and things like that. But also from the African influence, like nothing goes past a really good like braai with like pap or nshima on the side and some gravy, and the gravy is usually onions, tomatoes, and like spinach. So I think that's a really classic one as well, especially like on the weekend when you have people over. It's a really easy thing to cook and enjoy as well. I think those are like the really famous kind of things that we would typically have as meals.
Perfect. So, are there any particular cultural holidays that you take part in or your family took part in growing up?
Yeah, so because my background as a blend of cultures, what actually dominates a lot of our special occasions is the religion we follow, which is Islam. So Eid is a really big one. For those of you who know about like Ramadan, where you have the 30 days of fasting, at the end of that, you have like a big special day called Eid, but we also have another one a little bit later on in the year when we have our pilgrims that go to Saudi Arabia to do pilgrimage, and we also have a Eid at the end of that. So those are the two, I would say, key events that we look forward to, and we probably celebrate together as a family and a community quite often.
So, for these holidays, is there particular dishes that are prominent in those holidays?
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
So on Eid, I think one of the most common things is that all the women will be like preparing for like weeks in advance, and they'll do a lot of sweet treats. So, like from the Indian background, there's sweet treats are called mithais. So we have things called barfi, and we have things with basically made with like ghee and sugar as the dominant ingredients, but then there'll be like a element of spice that creates the flavor. Barfi is actually made out of milk powder. So there's they're more, they look very much when they're done like a little slice. Those are really, really common around those festive seasons. And then you also have more savory type of things. So we would enjoy something called gatia, which I think a lot of people will see in the convenience stores. Or we have something called chevro as well, which is like a savory, I like to say it's a savory trail mix. So there's like puffed rice in there. There is chana, which is basically chickpeas, like split chickpeas in there. Then you use a lot of curry leaves and mustard seeds to kind of flavor it as well. So it's literally something you scoop up with your hand and like chuck in your mouth, and it's like the savory element. So those things dominate a lot. And I think from family to family, depending on what they enjoy, some people will do a very traditional like big pot of like akni or biryani. That's usually the main meal, and there'll be lots of side dishes on the side. We'll have pickles, and we'll have the yogurt dip, which we call raita. And then you also have different components of dessert. And I think desserts go from the very traditional Indian desserts, which you can have like a gulab jambu, to halwa. And then there's the African influence where we love things like milk tarts. So I think that gives you a little bit of an idea around some of the different things that we have on those days.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear about all the different types of dessert.
Yeah.
Do you feel like you notice a big difference as far as the type of spices, cooking oils, cooking methods between those cultures, or are they similar?
Yeah, so I think the key difference is that in the African cuisine, the spices are there, but they are different in the composition. So they're a lot, they're not as rich, and so there isn't as a variety of different spices put in. So I know in Africa they love to use so we use stock cubes, right? So they have like stock powder, which enhances the flavor. So they love to use like a product called Bisto in their cooking, and it kind of like enhances everything. But then there's these little sachets called like spice for rice and spice for chicken, which you have a look at it, it's a blend of different ingredients, but it's not very strong in flavor. It's just like enhances the flavor versus Indian cuisine, where you're kind of using a lot of the whole spices in your cooking, and I think that changes the flavor profile quite a bit. So like whole cardamom, whole cloves, whole pepper, bay leaves, curry leaves, mustard seeds, cumin seeds, those things will feature either powdered or whole a lot more. And I think the ratio or the amount you put in is a lot bigger. So flavor profile is quite different. And it's really just about how much of that spice they're using. But if you go back to that traditional African diet, they just flavor with salt, onion, and tomato. That's like a stock staple, and it really brings in flavor.
Gotcha. Awesome. Okay, perfect. Well, you gave us a beautiful snapshot of these different cultures and how you grew up eating. Loved hearing about that. Now, if it's okay, I want to do a shift to talking about health in general, as far as, challenges and particularly your niche. So in
Mhm.
general, what challenges do you feel that the population that you work with face?
Yeah, so I predominantly work with the Southern African population. And I think the biggest challenge that they probably face is lack of access to the healthcare and then lack of education. So in Zambia, the literacy rate is quite low. Like if you compare it to some of the neighboring countries like Zimbabwe, where the literacy rate is quite high, you'll see there's a big difference also in the way that healthcare works as well. So what is happening right now with Africa is that there's this big shift in terms of the diet going from the traditional diet to now a slightly more Western diet because of urbanization and development of the country. So as these influences are coming in, you're having more fast food chains, you're having more commercial products that are like sweetened beverages or like our typical, I guess, um, junk foods that we would call them, or very ultra processed foods featuring. And before those things were, they were exported, no one could afford them, and now they're being made locally and they're super affordable and they are everywhere. So even like local vendors on the side of the road who used to sell like, roasted maize or roasted groundnuts and roasted cassava, you'll see there's a lot more now selling like packaged kind of products where they've got the sweets, the puffed maize, all of those kind of sweetened beverages as well, you see is starting to shift and change the face of what we're seeing in the supermarkets and in the markets as well. And this is now
Mhm.
leading to a country or countries that are really struggling with malnutrition, undernutrition, into the opposite side of things, which is all of these chronic diseases happening with overnutrition. And so what you'll see now is there is this really big proportion of the population that is getting diagnosed with chronic diseases. And the World Health Organization has kind of called it the triple burden of disease, right? So we've got the communicable diseases happening, you've got the undernutrition, you've got the overnutrition, and for the most part, the education, the knowledge, the interventions, the screening is not really there. So when I was working in Zambia in the clinics, I would see people come through. High blood pressure probably affects like 40% of Africans. It's really, really high. And so they would have that as a dominant health condition, but diabetes is also like exponentially increasing in the country as well. And that is where I would find a majority of my work was. Of course, weight loss is part of it or part of the management of it. But if you look at the obesity and the overweight rates in the country, it's not as high. It doesn't match the proportion of the chronic diseases that are coming out. So it's very interesting to understand. And if you actually look online, the research is very little. Number one issue is probably people don't get identified or screened or even diagnosed or even know they have the condition. And then once they do have it, there is a lack of access to care. So it may be that just within the healthcare system, there isn't enough people trained to give them that knowledge. I have a background as a lecturer from the University of Zambia, so I saw a big chunk of what kind of, I guess, healthcare professionals are coming out of the systems and what kind of training they're getting. And I saw the gaps in that. So it is a very multifaceted, I guess, area. But in a nutshell, I focus in on those chronic diseases and trying to provide that intervention to people, provide access to the education where they can actually see their cultural foods visually and understand, okay, how do I not overhaul my diet, but take what I know, go back to my traditional foods and eat in a way that is going to be protective of my health, and avoid, this chronic disease that I've got from getting any worse, right? So just reducing your mortality rate as well. So yeah, hopefully that gives you a snapshot into it. It, like I said, it's very multifaceted. So many different elements that influence on so many different levels.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And I love how you work to keep their cultural roots, because I feel like, at least here in the US, when people start talking about nutrition, they do tend to want to westernize people's diets, and that you don't need to change your diet to a different type to be healthy. You can still have your cultural foods and be healthy.
Yeah.
With like what you're doing. Can you give us any particular examples of like how you help them? I think you mentioned do you use like food models or recipes pertaining to their culture. What do you use to kind of help them?
So I think the biggest thing for me that I've done is I've developed my own healthy eating plate. for the Zambian population. So I basically have represented their foods on the plate. So this is something that people can download for free off my website, and they can start as a visual guide to just start understanding the basics of nutrition. So they will start knowing that, okay, this group of foods are carbs, this group of foods are protein, these are fats. But when they're looking at the picture of the plate model, they can also see their foods. Like they can see Capenta, which is tiny sardines that they eat common in the protein section, or they can see locusts or caterpillars in the protein section, or offal, or things that they eat. So the plate model has probably been my best tool because it's a visual guide. So when there is a barrier in terms of literacy, in terms of education, or even a language barrier, it's been an amazing tool for me to, whatever chronic disease I'm teaching, have visual guides. So I've developed a lot of resources for my clients over the years. Um, the plate model is one of them, but I have like different handouts and resources that I've done for like diabetes and so on. So there is that resource element, that education element that happens in clinics, but on the broader scale, we have been trying to educate online. So just like we see these beautiful, like, little posts on Instagram where you have eat this, not that, swap this for that. I try to represent cultural foods in those kind of images and do little educational videos on that as well, so that people start seeing it. And I use Facebook a lot because that's where majority of the Africans are. They're not on Instagram as much. So that's where a lot of things are happening. So we have like a little community where we answer questions. We've got the website where you can kind of get those resources and learn more about it. And then we also work in like corporate spaces. Like we approach like the big banks and start educating through the staff there with healthy eating programs for the staff, like wellness programs. um so I wear many hats because when I was there I was like, oh, there's so many gaps, let me fill this one and this one and this one and this one. So I kind of have done a fair few bits and pieces, and with my background as a lecturer at the uni, that also means that I spend a lot of time also upskilling and mentoring Zambian nutritionists as they graduate. So there's my toes are in a couple of different pods.
Oh, that's awesome. And it happens, right? When I started working in kidney health, I saw that need for kidney nutrition for the Hispanic population. So I started my kidney Instagram. And then from there, that led to people being like, oh, that's awesome that you're talking about the culture. Like, let me tell you about my culture. And I'm like, great, I want to hear it. And that's how I started the podcast, is focused on like cultural foods and health. And just one thing leads to another, and you want to do all the things.
Yeah, it's a very big gap, and I think we um, are starting to get a bit more diversity in the nutritionist and dietitian population. So we're starting to see more and more people go, hey, you're talking about the Mediterranean diet. I can't afford olive oil. I don't have salmon in my country. I don't eat these vegetables. But you have to take the style of eating or the basics of it and just translate it into those foods that people are used to. Because every country, every piece of land will have their own version of different fruits, vegetables, starches, and so on. And they have the exact same capacity to meet those recommendations. It just looks different, which is why I go back to, yeah, pictures literally are the best thing, because it's like we're making a recommendation verbally, but a lot of the time they're just seeing it. They're like, yes, I know that. I know that food. Okay, I know that food. So that's the connection that really is missing, is having that visual translation of the data we have into,
Mhm.
this is my life. These are my foods. This is what's in my pantry and in my home. So, I need you to talk to me on those terms.
No, absolutely. I love that you have that. I'm gonna have to look into that, into your resources. Uh,
For sure.
Tell me a little bit. I saw, where you're talking about your bio, how you're helping women in particular with weight loss worldwide. How's that been?
Yeah, so that's I guess a bit of a spin in the recent years where I kind of took all the experience that I had in clinic and just went, okay, well, what are people struggling with? Because as much as you work with people with NCDs who have a diagnosis, etc., there's also a huge part of the population who wants to lose weight for different reasons, including preventative, right? So they haven't reached that point of, okay, I have a diagnosis, now I'm being pushed to do something about it, but they're becoming health conscious and image conscious and aware. And I think one of the biggest things especially in the Zambian population, is that we love to do fat diets, like really extreme diets. So cutting out carbs, Banting is a really big one there, blood type diets. There's so much non-science based diets out there, and you don't need to be qualified or registered. Everyone can have a business. So the information is very rampant. Like I remember even reading in the newspaper once, like the vice prime minister of the country, like demonizing Inshima, which is the staple carb of the country. So it's something I felt like I need to like debust these myths. There's just so much out there. And that's where I started getting women coming and going, okay, I lose the weight, it comes back on. I lose the weight, it comes back on. So I've worked on developing what I call the Eat Smart method. So we look at mindset, which is a lot of psychology work. We look at the education side. We look at how do I develop the tools and strategies to actually implement what I want to do, or a strategy to overcome a barrier when it comes my way. And how do I now maintain this long term and have the right support and accountability along the way? So that's been where I've kind of thrown myself over the last 18 months. Here is focusing on developing that framework and a few courses and programs on that as well. So, yeah.
How exciting to be able to expand your reach, just beyond all over the world. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Social
Perfect.
media has made it easy, but also complicated.
Absolutely. But I'm glad we have it because then I wouldn't have met you. So here.
That's true. That's very true.
That was wonderful to hear about. Do you have any final comments about being a cultural dietitian or working with patients?
I think for me, it's always been a passion. Um, I've always loved to translate like what I've learned in uni into the everyday person. I think I always see the clinical side, the research side a lot of the time. So actually being in practice and having the ability to make it work for people right down on that individual level is something I really, really enjoy. And I hope to see, more diversity in the resources we have out there, in the dietitians and nutritionists that we have out there. I know there's some people doing some great stuff. And so I'm just excited to see what happens in the space of cultural foods going forward. I think social media is going to be the platform that changes the way that we do things as well. And hopefully we can get, more of our resources and cultural foods kind of out there and in people's faces so we can reach more people.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm really glad I got to meet another dietitian that loves to talk about the culture and cultural foods. So just so that in case in the future people want to see these resources, where can we find you?
Yeah, so I have a website. It's eatsmartdietetics.com. So there's a bunch of free resources available to download. So even if you're a dietitian and you have something that you want to visually use. And then I'm also on Instagram. My Instagram handle is weight loss underscore nutritionist underscore. And you'll find me on Facebook on Eat Smart Dietetics as well. Those are the main areas that I am.
Perfect. Well, it was wonderful to speak with you. reach out anytime if you ever want to talk again about something related to food and culture. But thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
A big thank you to Fatima for being on this week's episode. Follow her on Instagram to learn more about her work, and follow us to never miss an episode. We are Food Culture Curious on Instagram and on TikTok, and we have a Facebook group called Food Culture Curious Dietitians. Every little action you guys do is so helpful to me to keep creating content for you. So please like, follow, and share. Take a screenshot of this episode and tag us on socials.
And now for a quick disclaimer. Food Culture Curious is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not take the place of medical advice from licensed healthcare professionals. If you need to seek medical advice, please speak to your healthcare provider. Thank you for listening.